Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Sales and Operations Planning State of the Union. If you experience any technical difficulties joining the WebEx session today, please dial 1-866-229-3239. During today's presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. However, you can submit written questions at any time by going to the Q&A panel in the lower right corner of your screen. Type your question in the space provided and click on the send button. We encourage you to submit questions at any time during today's presentation, and your questions will not be viewable by other attendees. Please be sure to direct your questions to the default setting, which is all panelists. Your host today is Constance Corll, Director of Marketing with Supply Chain Insights. I would now like to turn the conference over to Ms. Corll.
Thank you, Nathan. Welcome to Sales and Operations Planning S&OP State of the Union webinar by Supply Chain Insights. I am happy to be your host for today. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few details. Today's agenda includes Lora Cecere, founder and CEO of Supply Chain Insights, leading the presentation, sharing results from the same titled Supply Chain Insights Research Report. And throughout the presentation, Lora will ask our special guest panelist, Jack Lyon, Vice President of Operations for Enterasys Networks. Jack has responsibility for the Enterasys supply chain, which includes the collaborative S&OP process, as well as Benji Green, MSIE CSCP, Director of Sales, Operations, and Inventory Planning at Avaya, as they share their insights on S&OP at their companies. We also want to hear from you, so please participate and ask questions in the Q&A section. We will get to as many as possible as we go through the presentation. Today's Twitter hashtag is SCI Webinar, so please go ahead and tweet out nuggets of information in the social networks. So let's get started. I'm happy to introduce Lora Cecere.
Thank you so much, Constance, and we're joined today by Jack and Benji, and we picked Jack and Benji because they're using different technologies, and they both represent learners and leaders in S&OP and the ability to move from a volume base to a profitability response. Our goal at Supply Chain Insights is to allow the research that we do to be the fabric so that supply chain leaders can elevate the discussion. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to first have Jack tell us a little bit about his story. He's going to spend about 5 minutes. And then Benji is going to tell us a little bit about what happened at Avaya for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to ask Jack and Benji to give their insights on lessons learned on the research that we were able to get from over 90 respondents globally, and they were equally process and discrete companies. We're excited to be able to have this research. It represents our second year of doing this study, and what we want to do is track the progress of sales and operations planning. And we call it the State of the Union deliberately because one of the issues is that folks just have problems putting it together. How do we get sales and operations to work together for S&OP? So Jack, with that, tell us a little bit about your State of the Union at Enterasys. Tell us your story.
Great, thanks, Laura. Good morning, good afternoon, people. Thanks for joining. So my story starts off with Enterasys Networks, right? We're the leader in wired and wireless network infrastructure and security solutions. Our networks are powered by innovation, right? They're fueling the business innovation and really accelerating the IT transformations within the business that we support. Our purpose is to deliver the highest quality user experience. That's centered around guiding principles around people, technology, and services. Our solutions are Wi-Fi, mobility. It's a wired-like performance in support of the bring your own device, the BYOD movement. We have data center offerings, which is modular, top of rack, chassis-based switching and routing products. And we have unified management, which is the glue that holds all these hardware platforms together. So getting to mature S&OP at Enterasys, our journey started in 2004. We faced a number of challenges. These challenges included, a synchronization of supply and demand, timely and accurate information, excess and obsolescence, and organizational silos. So understanding these problems, we collectively got together and really went after a collaborative approach, pulling together the sales operations teams, our product management teams, finance, supply chain, to really go after and develop a collaborative global process. Tools played a big part in that to drive our success. The tools were implemented over the course of the last 10 years, right? They didn't happen overnight. The tools came into play as we advanced our process. We saw a real short time to success. Mostly in the E&O space, we were seeing significant charges being taken to the P&L as a result of excess and obsolescence inventory, and by implementing this process, we were able to see that really disappear pretty quickly. So really setting up for the long term was really, I guess an emphasis around driving towards orchestrating, right? So the reality is, if you're familiar with the Gartner, next slide, Laura. If you're familiar with the Gartner, quadrant around the matrix around S&OP, orchestrating is that level 4 process. That's the end game for us. We're not quite there yet, but the reality is we continuously strive to get towards that process. I guess the advice that I have, to get to that orchestrating process is really stay committed to S&OP process, right? It's over communicating with shareholders. The shareholders being our executive management team. Their involvement in this process is critical. Without it, it would not be as successful as it is today. It's also setting aggressive targets. It's really going after, each quarter end, looking at postmortems, lessons learned to really develop and learn from what we do on a quarterly basis. Some of the measurements we have is MAPE, mean absolute percent error. Really, that's a metric that measures the overall success of the process. We also get into front log accuracy, which measures the sales and sales operations performance. We also track a forecast versus actual by product family that really measures the product management inputs into the process. And then we kind of close with some over/under deviation analysis that looks at how we're tracking on the individual functions as they input data into this process. And lastly, one of the things we really monitor on is our front log data. It's tracking deals that were won or created inside the quarter. It really puts us in a bind in order to support our customers' expectations. So at the end of the day, we're all about continuous improvement and supporting our mantra of there's nothing more important than customer, and that's really being driven home today by our S&OP process.
Thank you so much, Jack. 8 years of work, and I love your insights, but let's hold those until after we hear from Avaya. So Benji, tell us the Avaya story.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to everybody, and welcome to everybody else as well. This is a great topic. It's exciting to me. I'm a very lucky man that I truly love and enjoy my job, and that's S&OP development every day. Let me just quickly tell you about Avaya so you know my background, where I'm coming from. Avaya is $4.5 billion revenue company. It's in a high-tech enterprise communication space. And fundamentally what we do is we integrate telephone and data communications from very small businesses all the way up to really our bread and butter, which is very large enterprises. And that's across the unified telecommunications as well as call centers, data networking, and then a good portion of our business is actually services and maintenance and maintaining those infrastructures and investments from our customers. You can go to the next slide if you would, please, Laura. Our journey it's been ongoing. I think every S&OP journey really is. We've had an S&OP process at Avaya for over 10 years now. About 3 years ago, we really doubled down the efforts on that, and that included bringing me in to spearhead and deliver on that effort. We've made a lot of progress over the last 3 years, but like Jack mentioned, I'm not sure you ever reach an end state, but you can definitely get into the magic quadrant. One of the most critical aspects and advice I'd give to people interested in the topic is that first understand where you are, where your company is. Many companies are at the very bottoms up part of the process, doing purely just volume-based forecasting, and even advanced ones still have opportunity to grow. So I really recommend at the very beginning of the process is doing a hard look at the current internal processes and where you are on that maturity continuum, doing external benchmarking, and potentially even involving another company from an engagement standpoint that's got more experience in the area. And then through that process, you'll learn what the possibilities are, and it will really help you solidify and set your own strategic objectives, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year plan to develop in the S&OP maturity. And I often see a mistake within some companies that don't have enough span or other parts of the organization involved in the S&OP process. So I highly recommend you include absolutely finance, but even organizations like research and development, engineering, procurement, that all can have a big influence on the end state of your S&OP vision. I also agree with Jack that you should dream big, set high aspirational goals for the development and the opportunity that it can deliver. It's important to have achievable stepping stones on that path, but be sure you've always got a long-term vision. And with enough persistence, and again, continual benchmarking on best in practice, it's well worth the investment to drive S&OP transformation. All right, next, Laura. Okay, just the last topic I'll talk about before I pass it back to the study is one of the most critical parts of S&OP is being agile. It's the ability to react to changes in the plan and to actively change the plan as you progress. Despite the best efforts of any S&OP process, there's going to be error. There's going to be problems. You're going to get the forecast wrong, or their plan won't come to fruition. One of the best ways to develop the agility is to really consciously and intentionally understand where that risk is. There's two major risks at least. One coming from your demand volatility. Where is your greatest risk on the demand and forecasting side of the business? And then two, what's the operational impact of that? Some products or mistakes will have very little impact to the business, and some can have very large ones. By combining the view of those two, you will be able to not only understand the risk and implications to the business, you'll be able to develop contingency plans. You'll know where you've got the greatest financial risk. You'll be able to put in place a response plan to that, and you'll be able to define the roles and responsibilities of people that can react to it to drive closure or resolution to the risk it brings. So one of the big parts of agility is being prepared. Know your risk areas and have contingency plans that allow you to react quickly and try and drive closure. And these are a couple of things we've implemented at Avaya. We've seen some tremendous progress, and we've still got a ways to go, but it's a fun part of my job every day.
Well, thank you, Jack and Benji, for sharing your story. What I want to do now is talk a little bit about the research that we completed, and we just published a report that's available on SlideShare and also on our website, and it's available for everyone to use. And the slides are also available for this webinar on SlideShare. And it's our goal at Supply Chain Insights to provide research that's usable for supply chain leaders everywhere. This study was completed, it's a quantitative study, and it's part of our series of action steps to help leaders to improve S&OP. It was done in the March 22nd to April 9th time frame, and it included 117 business leaders across 50 companies and 13 industries. It was equally represented by discrete and process industries, and there wasn't a lot of difference in terms of maturity between process and discrete companies. What we wanted to understand was, what is the impact of S&OP on both agility and alignment? And what we found was that companies, if they were mature, meaning that they had moved from a volume-based response to looking at profitability and moving from inside out to outside in, which outside in is looking at the channel response, and we'll get into the levels of granularity of maturity. But for the purposes here, let's just say that we've moved from a volume response to being able to look at profitability. When these companies had a more mature goal, and 40% of them did, they had double the level of agility. And agility in the study was defined as the ability to have the same cost, quality, and customer service given the level of demand and supply volatility. So we asked people to rate themselves 1 through 7 on their perception and ability to deal with that demand and supply volatility. And when they had the mature goal, they rated themselves as twice as able to deal with that volatility. We also asked them to rate the level of alignment in the organization between functions. And you'll see in a later slide is that companies are really struggling with the alignment of the sales organizations and the operations organizations, which is really the genesis of S&OP. But when companies were able to align on this more mature goal, that they moved past just a volumetric response into the ability to look at what-if modeling for profitability and to do the outside in, that they had 46% better alignment. And again, this is a self-rated alignment in terms of how well they thought that the functions were aligned. Now, the other thing we found in this study was that 80% had S&OP processes, and the average company had 4 S&OP processes. These actually either evolved from a functional look or a divisional look or a regional look, but that there's a lot going on in S&OP. So, Jack, let me just start with you. Do these results surprise you? Would you expect to have this level of impact of being able to drive a more mature S&OP goal?
So, yes, right? So I am somewhat surprised, right? The reality is I think the 2 times better agility, 100% improvement makes perfect sense, right? I would expect that. I am a little bit surprised around the alignment side, right? I would have expected that if someone had a more mature goal process, that alignment would have been key to that. So I would have expected that percentage to be somewhat higher.
Okay. Benji, how about yourself? How do you feel about these high-level results?
I think the agility and the overall business performance of 200% improvement is right in line with what I'd expect. So I echo Jack's comments there. I think 46% cross-functional alignment is still a very strong result, but I agree that I'd actually expect it to be a little bit higher. We've seen, I've never put a number on it, but we've seen easily that type of improvement over the last 3 years here at Avaya, as well as previous experience I've had. So I think it says that's a minimum improvement you could expect.
Right. And so, Jack, in terms of recommendations for people as they look at these results, is there anything in terms of your journey you would share about the ability to improve the goal attainment or to drive alignment?
I think it's critical, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the demand plan, that signal that you're putting on your suppliers, right? It's probably the biggest check the company's going to write, right? I think that's a huge huge expense that needs the visibility, right? And I would think, you know, from just a pure expense, you know, P&L impact, inventory impact, that the executive team would definitely want to be more involved, right? So that there would be that higher level of cross-functional alignment, right? So I think just, you know, maybe it's leveraging the finance organization to become the heavy to make this thing more, you know, to make that process more collaborative.
Benji, any recommendations for people at this stage as they look at these results?
Well, I think if you're considering really investing in S&OP, you've got to look at the return on that investment. And the value of the supply chain for most hardware-based companies is so large that it far outweighs the expense of putting in an S&OP. So if you're considering it, I think I'd say look at this study, look at other studies. the evidence is pretty overwhelming of the value and the opportunity, when done well and when consistently driven to mature level.
Well, let's get into some of the other results. So, Benji, you had talked about building with the end in mind, and based upon my studies of sales and operations planning for the last 8 years, I believe people have to go through these stages progressively, that they start with a feasible plan, which allows them to model manufacturing and distribution, and if they've got constraints, to model the constraints. And then they match demand and supply at a volumetric level, and then they have to move to profitability, and they find out that the technologies don't work very well to analyze mix or to be able to do what-if analysis for profitability. And then they realize that they're inside out, meaning that they've got to go outside in and look at the channel and look at their suppliers and move from an enterprise view to a network view. And, we have pushed forward a 5-stage maturity model that's in the report, but based upon the responses, and these are self-rated, this is where we are in terms of the study. Now, Jack, where would you put Enterasys in your journey? How mature would you rate yourself, and where are you going?
Yeah, so I think, we're definitely not at stage 4 or 5, right? So we're somewhere in between. I think we're very good at demand steering, right? So, looking at the available inventory that we do have and really working back through the sales operations, sales organizations to really drive and steer that supply to close the opportunities. Where we're going, and I think really, where it's not allowing us to get to stage 4 or 5 is the whole demand sensing space, right? So, there's a lot of effort right now, to try to bring in our distribution partners into the process, bring some of our top, high volume customers into the process to really go after and really, take that next step, that next, the next improvement to really, fortify this process and make it better than it already is. So obviously work to do, but, we have initiatives that we're going after to try to improve.
Benji, how about yourself? Thanks, Jack. Where would you rate yourself on this continuum?
I think we're high 3, pushing into the low 4 area. I think Jack brings up a good point in that there's different parts of S&OP, and you can be fairly mature in some and less mature in others, or have greater opportunity there. We do fairly well with managing our customer transitions, particularly some of our largest direct enterprise customers, and managing the portfolio around the space and the technology trends there. Where we've got a lot of opportunities on the far back end of our suppliers, where you can see component technology trends, staying ahead of the technology curve, designing your product in R&D to integrate the supplier-based side of S&OP. So you can be really good in some areas and clearly have opportunities in others.
But, Benji, as you think about designing with the goal in mind, what advice would you have for people, particularly as they move from volume to profitability or inside out to outside in? Any advice?
Yeah, there is. I think as you mature, and I think this data represents this very well, it's easy to, when you set your first goal, you reach it, and then you kind of stall or you pause. And you see a lot of people stuck here in stage 2. I think one of the most important things to do is very consciously involve other organizations and other companies, depending on where you are on that maturity level. To give you an example, if you traditionally have an S&OP process may not involve R&D, but if you do include R&D, then you start to get this whole view of the component side of the supply chain, and then you realize, oh, I could design in the same component across 5 different products. Now I could single source that off of one manufacturer. And so you begin to get this external view by enforcing maturity by really consciously trying to involve other organizations and other companies.
Mm-hmm. Jack, any guidance for people from your perspective on how to make this transition?
Yeah, so I think I couldn't agree more with what Benji just said. I think another avenue to consider would be, metrics, right? So if you have, a really, stringent, tough metrics that you want to achieve, having postmortems and reviewing those and making, the areas that kind of stick out, action plan, continuous improvement projects, that will get you to the next step, right? It's going to bring you to that next level. So, continuously go after aggressive metrics, continuously, strive for higher goals. And that should, definitely facilitate movement between the various stages.
Well, and as we get into the concept of alignment, this is how they self-rated themselves on alignment. So what we asked was, for the entire group, tell us the importance of alignment, and then self-rate yourself on where you actually see performance. And we're looking at the gap analysis across the functions. And the greatest gap is, of course, between the sales group and the operations group. But you can see there's pretty big gaps in other organizations as well, sales and finance, marketing and finance. And what we found is, as those goals mature and as we become more cross-functional and as we become outside in, these gaps start to close. And it was very interesting to me to see the degree of the gaps, and this is actually in the study. Any insights here, Jack, about closing these gaps or thoughts as you look at this slide?
Yeah, so I'm glad to see that I'm not alone and that my biggest gap is definitely between the sales organization. It's really data, right? It's using the data that you have and going after it. Like, so for instance, we have a ton of data in our CRM package that we extract and we utilize, and from an operations perspective, we're continuously looking at it, and we're challenging, right? So we're going back and challenging, the data that's in these systems. To me, it's really, understanding that, and allowing, the analysis to take place. And I think with the strong S&OP process, you're not really gathering data. The data should be there, within your systems. It's now spending the energy and effort around analyzing it and modeling it, and then really challenging it and bringing the information that you're carving up out of that data to the forefront and asking the various questions.
Yep. And Benji, how about your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see the gaps either. I think there's a couple of truly unifying themes in business. One is your customer. It's number one, most important thing. And number two is you've got to drive profit. If the more you can get everyone in the company to align around those two metrics, that alignment of incentives, and obviously this is a very EC level type discussion, but the more you can do that, the more I've seen these gaps go away. And then both sales and finance and operations are driving for profitable and customer satisfaction. So I think alignment of the metrics is very important, and truthfully, to get this done, you've got to have at least one, preferably several people at the EC level really committed to S&OP. It's one of the biggest challenges, is getting that executive alignment.
We're going to talk about that next. Now, we have a question on just how has technology helped or hindered the S&OP process. So, Benji and Jack, as you think about this, just want to remind people that this entire slide set is available for download, but what you're going to see in the entire slide set is that we have a greater adoption in the industry of people with S&OP specific technologies, and we also see that people that are able to have these S&OP specific technologies are able to drive greater alignment quicker. And so, Benji, as you think about technology, how has technology helped or hindered the alignment and the agility in your S&OP process?
There's no doubt that it has. For me, what technology allows you to do is take multiple different views. You've got an order fulfillment view, and you've got a sales view, and you've got an account manager view, and you've got a procurement manager's view, and you take all those views and you can normalize them around one view or set of data that allows you to see the true outcome of the business. When you understand what happens when person A does something in the plan, how it affects the total outcome at a profitability level, which everybody in the group can understand, then those decisions become much more clear, and again, driving that alignment. So it allows you to normalize the data to a view where everyone can come to terms with it, as well as things like simulation and modeling, which allows you to look at the risk of where you might be wrong. And knowing that risk, you make different decisions, and you can align on those decisions.
Jack, I also see that in the data from the study, but any perspective here to share of how technology has helped or hindered your ability to drive this alignment?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our specific case, technology has absolutely helped, right? It's made our process more efficient and timely, or it allows us to do other things than data gathering, right? The one hindrance was out of the gate, right? So it's making sure that you have clean data, right? So we strived, and it took us probably a good 6 to 9 months to go through the data that we had, and when we put it into the technology tools to drive the process, it was really taking the time to really clean through that data, scrub out the issues and anomalies that made the results appear different than they really should have been. So it was definitely a hindrance at the start, but the reality is, right now I couldn't live without it.
Yeah, absolutely right, Jack. I agree with all that.
But, let's look at the technology, because when we did the study, we found that the companies that are more mature were able to drive the alignment because of the visualization, but that we still have gaps on visibility and the ability to do the trade-offs or profitability modeling or what-if modeling. But we find companies that have the use of specific technologies for S&OP are able to do this better, but we still have gaps. And Benji, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I think there's several things. I think the most important one is understanding the processes that are going to enable you to do, creative analysis once you have the data, and getting that data really ready and available, as Jack mentioned earlier. That's certainly one of the big areas where I think a lot of people fall down. But the other one, I think people in the second stage of maturity model usually jump that hurdle or get past that. I think the other big one where I've seen a lot of companies make mistakes is they'll buy an outsourced specialized software. They'll bring that in and they'll set it up under their their standard model, their model 1, let's say. But they don't invest in the internal resources to maintain and manipulate and enhance that software so that it can evolve as the process should evolve. In worst case scenario, you see the data comes in and it's got a couple problems, but those problems are so irritable that people even stop using it. Mm-hmm. So really dedicate the internal resources to understanding the data structure and being able to manage and control the process inside the IT tool.
Now, we also see in the research that you can't do this modeling on spreadsheets, but people want to know, do I start with process, do I start with technology, do I do them both at the same time? What's your vote, Benji? And then I'll go to Jack.
I think you definitely start with process. You start with some good external benchmarking, and then you start with some internal process design.
Yeah. Jack, your thoughts here? Are you surprised to see the gaps, or?
No, I couldn't echo Benji any more than what he said. Right. The reality is, when we kicked off our process here, right. So, it was a dedication on building our process, getting it to a point where we were comfortable with it, right. So, developing all the level 1, level 2 processes that really would drive drive this process, to the point where then we brought in technology and laid it on top of it. So I couldn't agree more. I think it's spending the time out of the gate developing a process that your specific business can be comfortable with, and then it's layering in the technology to drive it.
So who leads, Jack, at your organization by role, and where do they fit in the organization? Who leads the S&OP process?
So within Enterasys, the supply chain has the overarching responsibility for the S&OP process. So we're basically developing that baseline forecast. Once that forecast is then developed, it then is parsed out to the sales operations and product management teams for their input. That then rolls up into a collaborative view, which then we talk to at a pre-S&OP meeting with everybody, everybody that was involved in the initial process, coming to an agreement that then finally gets to a final, final S&OP meeting with the executive team to go off and really give the green light to go off and spend the money to build, the product requirements that the plan has said we need to have.
Great. Benji, in your organization, who leads and manages the S&OP process?
Similar, the supply chain, and in the last 3 companies I've been at, the supply chain definitely takes the lead. I think that's because of the exhausting intent to manage expense. But it's very common the supply chain takes the lead. It certainly is the case here. We do involve sales very early in the process, at least to give us initial indication before we go off and drive the preliminary plan. But otherwise, very similar process, sales and finance to make sure we've got, the funding we need, et cetera, for different types of investments, but very similar to Jack.
I've got now the slide up that looks at the largest challenges of building the sales and operations plan, and I've been doing this research for 6 years, and I see the same theme over and over again. In this particular study, 59% of companies were actually working on tying sales and operations planning to execution, and sales and operations planning is actually a tactical process, and of course we've got to tie it to execution. So I actually see in the study that we're improving in execution. The question is, who's the quarterback and does the calls? I see consistency year over year on the gap in technology, and probably the thing that I hear the biggest issue with and work with clients is the understanding and support from the executive team. And while we need executive involvement, the understanding by the executive team is the supply chain is a complex system, and improving the potential of the supply chain and building leadership and putting the right resources continues to be a theme that I hear a lot. So Jack, what's your reaction to this slide, and what is your perspective from your experience?
Yeah, no, I could completely agree, right? The reality is, I think without having executive level participation in the process, the process is going to fail, right? The reality is, I think collaboratively you got to come together with the answer, eliminate the finger pointing, right? If the process falls into one organization, you will not be successful, right? Because you're not going to meet the needs of, say, the sales organization. You're not going to meet the needs of, say, engineering when they're releasing new products. You're not going to meet the needs of, product management because they're not going to, they're not going to be driving the right products to support their businesses. So I think, having that collaborative process is critical to the overall success, and it's no doubt, I see it as the biggest challenge, right? If I didn't have executive level support within our process, it would fall down and be a meaningless process. It would be a waste of time and energy.
Did you have to do anything, Jack, to skill the executive team to do it, or did they just naturally want to drive the process?
I think at the end of the day, I think some of the financial impacts that we saw as an organization prior to S&OP, finance really, kind of strong down with supply chain to go after the rest of the organization to reel in the various, other groups to bring them into the process. So it didn't take long for the rest of the group to come on board, because at the end of the day they saw benefit, right? At the end of the day, sales saw an improvement in fulfillment and meeting their goals of supporting their customers, right? Product management saw the goal because it was a mechanism for them to improve their product families, right? to keep them on track from an excess and obsolescence standpoint, meeting this, the revenue targets that they were set forth and trying to drive. So I think out of the gate, it wasn't something they wrapped themselves around right away, but then they saw the incremental improvements and became a collaborative process.
And Benji, how about your perspective? As you look at this slide, are you surprised, and are there any words of wisdom you can give people for what you went through to deal with some of these challenges?
I'm not surprised. I think often people don't feel that they've got the support of the executive team to really drive the type of change and the cross-organizational type of change that comes. And I think that's why the executive support is really the first gate in an S&OP process, because an S&OP process mandates a cross-functional collaboration and alignment of objectives. And so you need your top leaders in each of those organizations to really commit to it and support it. I think one of the tricks, if you will, to helping drive that alignment is really to leverage the finance team. Every major organization will have a finance team. They hold the purse strings in many regards, and they speak the same language. So it's kind of easy to find a common partner in each of the different business groups through the finance teams. So that was certainly something I do on a regular basis, just as part of business as usual, but also as part of getting the commitment to invest in the S&OP process improvements.
And so what is the highest level of executive engagement that you have right now in your organization? Is it CEO, COO, vice presidents?
We have a deep review, hours-long review with our senior vice president, and then a preliminary review with this, well, not preliminary, but a higher-level view with the COO.
Okay. And Jack, what's the highest level of involvement that you have?
So it's CEO, right? The reality is CFO, CEO participate, as does the other various product management heads, R&D heads, sales heads. They participate in the final S&OP process as well. So it's basically the executive team it's in final S&OP.
And did you have any trouble getting them on board, Jack, or was it just that the business needed it so badly?
No, so I mean, we've gone through, I think since we kicked this off, we've gone through 2 or 3 CEOs, and I think everyone that came in saw the benefits of that and quickly, continued the participation and expectation that it was driven. So, no, I think we've seen, a willingness to participate.
So the study says that, if you have a strong alignment with the finance group and strong skills there, and you have clarity of the supply chain strategy, and you put the skilled resources, these are a lot of ands, right? You're able to move this along a lot better. But, the other thing is we've got to really look at what we measure. And, historically, people have done the fastest evolution of S&OP processes when they manage a portfolio of measurements. Not a lot of measurements because, we can't measure lots of things, but, 5 to 7 balance metrics. And I was actually pleased to see that many of the respondents of the study are actually measuring a portfolio of metrics of something around profitability, something around inventory, something around volume and revenue, something around customer service, and something around forecast accuracy. When we got to more mature companies, we actually saw a greater look at overall obsolescence and write-off and more of corporate social responsibility and end-to-end. So Benji, in terms of the measurement and the evolution of metrics, what can you share about your experience?
There's no doubt that a balanced metric system is really important to being successful at S&OP. It's the only way you can take in each organization's concerns, primary concerns, and keep them as willing participants in the process. That said, many of these roll up into a top-level metric, and that's profitability at a company-wide view, not just a sales margin view, but really true profitability or EBITDA viewpoint. So I do think it's important to prioritize the metrics, and though you have many sub-level metrics like forecast accuracy as an example, it's an indication of how that sub-process is doing. And the real value to the company is that high forecast accuracy means you're driving better EBITDA and better customer satisfaction. So I think the balanced approach is important. I do think it is important to prioritize them so you know which are the most important when it comes down to individual decisions.
Jack, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree that the balanced approach is the way to go, because you could be driving a metric in one area, inventory availability, for instance, and all that's doing is draining your cash, right? So balanced is definitely the approach. I mean, some of the things we obviously measure here is gross margin, inventory turns, the whole cash-to-cash cycle. That includes the days of inventory, payables, and sales. Made from a forecasting standpoint, availability to promise from a customer satisfaction standpoint, and also our ship performance from a customer satisfaction. So we try to evolve that balanced approach to really drive best in class.
Well, we've got a question from the audience around the cascade and the cadence of S&OP, and I spent time in the report writing about governance, either regional global governance or the governance around planning to execution. Jack, can you speak a little bit around the frequency of S&OP and how you do regional versus global governance?
Yep, sure. So our cadence it's a monthly cycle. It's a 4-week process within that monthly cycle. It's a rolling 4-quarter plan that we develop. So our sales operations teams basically represent the globe. So they're putting input into the process for their specific regions. Product management is really looking after the product family. So, and then the supply chain is really going after and developing that base level forecast, right? So based on historicals, and basically how it all comes together, in the course of 4 weeks. And like I said, we do it on a monthly basis.
And how about regional global governance? How global are you, Jack?
So, I mean, our process, we have one instance of an S&OP. It is a global process. We embed all the regions that we have in there. They roll into 5 specific territories. Our process is global.
And what is the role of the region and the role of the global organization? Are you looking at regional input and?
Yep. So, I mean, throughout the course of the various regions, the requirements are different for various products, right? So, in say Latin America, it may be more of a lower-end switching product as compared to, say, Germany, which is, a higher-end data center. So the regions are going after looking at their specific opportunities that they see in their pipeline and really rolling that into the overall forecast. So sales is looking at it from the standpoint of, the near term, right? So it's current quarter +1, whereas, say, product management is looking at it from more of a global perspective, right, of how they expect the overall performance of their products to be on a global aspect. So it's kind of a blended approach. The information is then brought into and compared against the baseline forecast, and then those deviations, if they're great, are then discussed at pre-S&OP. That's where we hash out the differences.
Great. Benji, your thoughts around cascade and cadence and governance?
Yeah, it's a complicated matrix because the more mature your S&OP process is, the more considerations it looks at. We definitely have, and where I've seen this succeed is a global-led process, one process that takes in the inputs from the different sales organizations. We do have regional interlocks for the sales organization. Obviously, we have interlocks within the supply chain as well. Supply demand planning as an example. And it's also a monthly process, current quarter plus 4 for us. You need to go out at least a year for manufacturing capacity and things like that. And it's also monthly. We put a lot of the data inputs from Salesforce.com, order fulfillment, price promotions from the business unit, life cycle details happen in week 1 and week 2. Week 3, we really deliver the plan that goes up for a final approval, and then we execute in week 4.
Okay, well, let's wrap up. You know, basically in the study we see that S&OP is growing in importance. Progress, we're inching along, but wow, great value in terms of alignment and agility. But the barrier is the understanding of the executive team, and as we evolve with the goal in the mind, we've got to really work on some of these subtleties like governance and the discipline of the program, and you know, how do we actually manage globally with regional input and tie planning to execution. I want to thank my panelists today, but before I let them go, I want to ask them to give one short, salient piece of advice to the listening audience. So, Jack, if you had one recommendation for people that are listening, what would it be?
Stay committed to the process, right? The reality is you will see results. It's really, you know, staying the path, you know, having that roadmap identified and trying to reach every, you know, every milestone along the way. Stay committed.
And yourself, Benji, what advice do you have?
I think you have to, before you commit to it, Jack, which I agree 100%, you have to commit to evolving S&OP in the first place. It works. Do your industry research. It saves tremendous money, dramatically improves alignment within a company, drives customer value. Commit to it, and then like Jack said, stay committed to it.
But I think, Benji, your point around the resources and continuous improvement is really, really critical. And in my experience, a lot of people miss that. They put it in like a technology project, right? And that evolution, I think, is so important.
Well, I want to thank dedication.
Yeah, I want to thank people for joining us today. I want to remind people that we are doing podcasts every month. We're doing 4 to 10 podcasts. They're available for download on our website, or they're available from, you know, downloading through the web onto your iPod. You know, if you're running, it's a good way that you can listen to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. We are in the middle of getting our agenda up for the Global Summit, and would love to have you register for the Global Summit. In the Global Summit, we are going to be talking about the Supply Chain Index and the correlation between supply chain financial ratios and market capitalization. And for those that are interested, we still have open seats for our Bricks Matter training classes that really help with how do we move from inside out to outside in and use channel signals and orchestrate across the supply chain. We remain committed to this webinar series. Every webinar that we do, we share the slides, we archive the replays. We do have continuation of the index throughout the month prior to our global summits so that you can see the results of the index for each of the Morningstar sectors. Each industry is very different, as you can see on our recent Supply Chain Index report. And our next cross-functional, cross-industry webinar is on big data supply chains and the future of analytics. We're actually closing the study, and we're answering the question of, do we have a big data problem or a big data opportunity? And in August, we're going to be talking about supply chain talents, the missing link of the supply chain. So we're on countdown for our global summit, and we want to continue the cadence of our podcast and our webcast. Again, I want to thank people for being here today. All of this is archived, and we want to hear from you. We want to help supply chain leaders improve their supply chain processes. Thank you, Jack and Benji, and I'll turn it over to you, Constance.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jack and Benji, for participating in today's S&OP webinar. Be sure to check out the Supply Chain Insights S&OP Drives Agility Research Report. I messaged that link over in the chat area, but it is at supplychaininsights.com/report. research. We are happy to provide the report to you for free and for you to share with your colleagues and network. Our next webinar is June 27th, Supply Chain Index Webinar Part 3, a focus on technology and apparel with Lora Cecere and Abby Mayer of Supply Chain Insights. You can find out more about this webinar and register on our website, supplychaininsights.com/upcoming-webinars. Thank you for attending today. See you next time. Have a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's webinar. We'd like to thank you once again for your time today, and you may now disconnect.